Okay, welcome, Rhode Island beekeepers. I'm Scott Langlis. I am the president currently of Rhode Island Beekeepers Association. Um, Tonight we have kind of a different meeting. For those of you guys who've been following us on our, the last few months or really the last year, most of them have been what I could call marquee speakers. They're big names. Top researchers, writers, scientists. Today we're doing something a little different. We're going to RIBA members. Sorry, I'm a little all over right now because I'm doing some Zoom stuff in the background here. So bear with me. But yeah, so tonight we got three speakers from RIBA. As you guys know, RIBA is such a great resource. I mean, we have really some top-notch beekeepers here. Tonight we have two master beekeepers, one master beekeeper candidate. So we're going to start off with Cindy Holt. She's going to talk on native bees. Then Sara is going to be talking about brood evaluation. And then rounding out the night, we've got Ed kind of batting cleanup, doing the Mite talk, which probably makes sense to have last, since I have a feeling that one's probably going to be the one to go long if one of them needs to go long. And as you guys know, I mean, mites are, you've heard us talk about it before, and there's a reason for it. So I don't really have a lot of club business. For those of you who maybe, I know there were some package pickups. Anybody want to raise your hand if you did install the package this weekend? Anyone? Cindy? Yeah, okay. Ended up being pretty good weekend if you did it today. Not so much yesterday, but it looks like the weather's going to be good coming up. So you guys, you just want to make sure you keep your packages fed. If you put that, the end of that can that they shipped with on there, that's fine, but don't assume that that's feed. That's going to be the last couple dregs, and it's probably gone by now if you put it on already this morning. So you really want to make sure you keep that new package fed. If you're not installing, especially on drawn comb, they've got to build all that comb out. That takes a tremendous amount of carbohydrates, and that's going to be your sugar syrup. So don't put a single ball jar on there. If you're feeding with ball jars, put several. Don't wait for them to all be empty before you refill them. If you go in and they're at quarter full, keep it very uninterrupted, either until they stop taking it or until you get your boxes drawn out. That's really going to be the biggest war you have right now. And then obviously releasing your queens at whatever point that you do that, depending on when you did your installation. I'm not sure if Lynn is on. Let me do a quick check here.
Yeah,
I think you are here. I want to give a shout out to Lynn Davignon and also Calvin Alexander. They did on, I believe it was Thursday and Friday this week. They had a special kind of Earth Day presentation for grade school kids. And I think it was like maybe second to fourth or fifth grade. And on Thursday, I believe what we were told was it was up to 500 students we're going to be watching. It was a little hard to gauge because a lot of them were watching, like their teachers Zoom, say. So we didn't have 500 attendees, but that's what we were told. It was going to be 500 students altogether. And then I know on Friday also we had like 4 or 5 separate classes. And Lynn just did such a great job, kind of an intro to what are honeybees about, what is the value of pollination, what does it take to be a beekeeper, what are the challenges. Did a great like hour-long presentation, then took all the questions from the class, and she really is just such a great like ambassador for beekeeping and for this organization. So I want to recognize her here. Just great job. And hopefully we'll do some more of that. I mean, just a great use of our resources right now too, when we can't have these live meetings. Like she and I talked after, she misses being able to go and talk in person to the kids and show them the props. And but we adapt to the situation. That's what we do as beekeepers. You go into a hive thinking you're going to split, and then you go in there and you see it's not ready to be split. So what do? You don't split it anyway. You adapt to the situation. Or you go and you think you're cleaning out a dead out, and then you go and there actually is a healthy cluster of bees in there. You adapt to the situation. So I view what we're doing now with Zoom as kind of an extension of that. And again, just great job, and hopefully we've got more of that coming up. That's really all I have. I'm guessing Sarah's on here, and I'm guessing we're going to be doing some more new beekeeper meetings. So again, we've been doing this the last couple months as you guys came out of bee school. Now, as packages are arriving, I'm sure your questions are going to become a lot more apparent. Things that you didn't know. Now that you have live bees to deal with, these questions are going to come up. So hopefully we'll have some dates for new beekeeper meetings we can throw at you guys. And as always, if you have questions, all our contact information is on the website. You can go to the board. You can check the mentor list on there by county. And if you're a new beekeeper, you need a mentor, certainly check that list. Go to your county. It'll list the county director. If you can't find someone on the mentor list itself, you can contact the county director, and hopefully they can match you up with someone. If you're a beekeeper with like maybe a couple years experience on this call right now, if you're in Providence County, we really need more mentors in Providence County. Our last meeting, executive board meeting, we talked to, I think Lily said she had something like 60 new beekeepers in Providence County looking for mentors. And we're trying, those of us who are mentors in Providence County, to not have like 10, 15 mentees a piece, so that we can actually pay the proper attention to them. So if you're a beekeeper, you've got a couple, even a couple years experience, more than a first year beekeeper. So if you've got the time, it doesn't have to necessarily be an in-person mentorship. It could be by phone, it could be by email, whatever you're comfortable with. Get in touch with Lily. Again, her email also is on the website. And we could really use your help. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Cindy. Cindy, if you're ready.
Yeah, I'm ready. I might, I left my notes upstairs on how to run a Zoom presentation, so I might need some help. So keep your mic on for a minute.
You got it.
All right. Are you all ready for me? Yes?
All yes. Right. Yes. Okay. Yay.
So hello, everybody. My name is Cynthia Holt. Please call me Cindy. I'm, if you haven't met me before, I'm the RIBA Yard Manager. I'm your EAS, Eastern Apiculture Society State Director, and I also own Little Reddy Beekeeping. So today, I'm actually going to do my screen share now. So let's see if I got that up. Yay, look at me go. Okay, done. Sharing my screen. Maybe you guys see that. You probably see all of my little thingamabobs too, so bear with me. Sorry. Okay, so let me go to slideshow. All right, it's not, all right, there we go, playing from start. Okay, so today I'm talking to you guys about the other bees of Rhode Island. I originally started by calling it native bees of Rhode Island, but some of these bees may be imports as well, just like the honeybee. And I didn't really want to get into the nitty gritty of who started out here, who didn't. That's for like another conversation. So anyhow, I wanted to talk to you guys about the other bees in Rhode Island. We are all here because of the honeybee, Apis mellifera. I like to refer to the honeybee as the gateway insect because it really can get you set on the path to really caring about other insects. How it began for me is I've been peering under rocks since I was a child, and it wasn't honeybees for me. It was decomposers. like flies and carrion beetles that I really had a passion for. But I ended up with honeybees because they're a little bit more accessible and acceptable to have around my house. We all know how you attract flies and carrion beetles, and that probably wouldn't fly with my family, no pun intended. I actually did not plan that. And that's actually a fly, that's not a bee. So anyhow, so more about me. In 2017, I began a relationship with a local company, and I surveyed plant bloom and pollinators for them for a year. I developed a protocol to monitor pollinators. And then in 2020, I began a relationship with that company and URI, and I started to trap bees and send specimens to them for identification. So unfortunately, I am a bee killer. I set out traps on day one, and what they are is they're called bee bowls, and they're little colored bowls. They're either white, blue, or yellow, and I set them out in a field, and I fill them with soapy water, and I come back 24 hours later, and I see what the bees get attracted to the color. They go in, they land on top of the soapy water, and they fall beneath the surface. Unfortunately, a lot of bees are so small that you need a microscope in order to properly identify them. And, you know, I have this nice photograph of a pretty green sweat bee, and it's really hard to identify on the wing. Anyways, so some bee facts. Bees are actually vegetarian hunting wasps. There are 20,000 bee species in the world, 4,000 in North America, and over 200 identified in Rhode Island. Across all of the bee families, 20,000 species, 77.4% are solitary, 13 are brood parasites, only 9.4% are social, like the honeybees and the bumblebees, and 0.2%, are social parasites. So you think of the Cape honeybee. And so, like I was saying, in order to properly ID many solitary and parasitic bee species, it is necessary to trap them. And you can only really identify them by wing patterns or certain facial features underneath a microscope, because they're really, really, really small. You saw on my last slide, those were like really small specimens. Some of them I have to glue to little pieces of paper to put on the pin. They're so tiny that if you pin them, they'd fall apart. Okay. So some other things to know about bees, some nesting terms. So solitary bees, each female builds and provisions her own nest based on habitat. An aggregation is a group of individual nests that are built and maintained by a single bee, but they're all close together. Communal is one entrance, with the bees sharing that entrance with individual nests off the main tunnel, and everybody cares for their own nests. Semi-social is they use the same nest and do a little bit of care cooperatively for young. And then eusocial, which is like the honeybees, all individuals share a nest. There's a division of labor in nest making and reproduction, and the nest is made up of mother and daughters. Okay, so and foraging, there's a whole bunch of different types of foraging behaviors. There's monolectic, which is they forage pollen from one variety of plant, which they're often called specialist bees. And their whole life cycle is revolving around the bloom time of that particular plant that they forage on. Oligolectic bees, they specialize in foraging from one genus or species. So it's just from like a few different types of plants. Like some will specialize on asters, some will specialize on sunflowers, but in the same family. Polylectic bees, they forage from a variety of unrelated plants. It's like a buffet out there for them. They'll just take anything. And it's the specialist bees that rely on just a few plants for forage that are most at risk from habitat destruction, because they can't switch to a different plant if theirs gets killed off. Okay, so we're going to meet the bees. So these bees that I'm talking about tonight are bees that are easy to identify in your garden. If you're working in your garden, you're sitting there, you're looking at the flowers, you can see these, and be able to identify them a little easier. You won't need to like catch them, kill them, and put them under a microscope. So they're much more fun to enjoy, I guess. Okay, so this is the first one. This is a Cellophane bee. They're called plaster, polyester, or cellophane bees, and they're ground nesting and some of the earliest to emerge in spring. Usually the males emerge before the females, and sometimes they emerge before there's really any forage out there. They're not really sure what they're eating, but they come before the females. Usually in any sort of nest, the female will lay the female eggs further down the tunnel and the male eggs up at the top, because they're kind of the sacrifice to temperature or predation. So they're ground nesting and some of the earliest to emerge in spring. Like I said, they're called cellophane bees or polyester bees because they line their nests with a waterproof substance, and sometimes they can be found in damp soil because of that. And they're identified by the glossa, which is part of the tongue, and the S-shaped second recurrent vein on their wing. Well, but they have really cool tongues. Sometimes when you're out in your beehives, the solitary bees will come and kind of freeload, and they'll hang around and they'll like try to get some honey, or they'll like go on your woodenware. And so it may not be the best video on your end, but that's Cellophane bee. I think it was like last April, and you can see her tongue's pretty darn cool. I don't know what she's trying to lick up, but all right. So if we go here, so there's her crazy looking glossa there. And if you go, so normally when we are putting bees under the microscope, we like to spread their wings out so we can see the patterns a lot easier. But if you look, you can see there's a distinct S shape up here, and that's a sign that it's a Cellophane bee. I probably mispronounce it, but I don't care. I read more than I talk. Okay, so the next one is Andrenidae, the Andrena bees. They're sometimes called mining bees. They're ground nesters as well. And they are the largest of the bee families, and they're found on all continents except for Australia. They have a variety of foraging behavior. Some are specialists, some are polylectic. And they are also solitary bees that often nest in large aggregations. And they're another bee where some of them will be among the first to emerge in the spring. So around this time, you're going to see Andrena bees and Collects. And this is actually a fall emerging Andrena bee, and you can tell their pollen collecting hairs is all up on their upper legs here. You can see I see with my cursor, and that's called the scopa. And unlike honeybees who have a corbicula, which is that depression in their back legs with the spiky hairs, and they roll up the ball of pollen and stick it on there, these guys just gather it on either their legs, which are just covered in hair, or on some bees have it on their abdomen, but we'll get to those in a few minutes. And bumblebees also have corbicula. Everybody loves the bumblebees. Everybody can spot bumblebees. They're social nesters. They're also able to buzz pollinate. I believe there's a few species of bees that buzz pollinate. Carpenter bees also do that. And what they do, honeybees do not buzz pollinate. They disconnect their flight muscles and they grab onto a flower and they buzz it. And I think it's anyway, and it causes that plant to release pollen grains, and which makes them valuable for tomato pollination in the hothouses. But unfortunately, that has also led to the spread of disease from imports back and forth between here and Europe, and which can account for a lot of the decline in population for bumblebees and other bees as well. They're identifiable by their large fuzzy bodies, and there's nearly 50 different species in North America. So this is, I think it's called the Great Northern Bumblebee. As known, this is Bombus impatiens. That's the common bumble that you're going to see, the most common in this area. I have no idea what this fine fellow is, or if it's a fellow or a lady. And this is a brown belted bumblebee. You can tell by that little brown spot there. But they're pretty cool looking, and they're very diverse in colorations, which is kind of neat. Okay, moving on to Melisodes bees. These are some of my favorites. These come out a little later in the summer and early fall, especially when the sunflowers are blooming. They love those. And they're also solitary ground nesting bees, and they're in the Apidae family along with honeybees and bumblebees, and can often be seen on sunflowers. And they're also called longhorn bees, as the males have very, very long antennae. That's a female right there. And, you know, females of all species of bees have the pollen collecting hairs or the corbicula. The males don't. It's just like with the honeybees. I think that's a male. You see these long antennae. And a lot of the times with the solitary bees, you'll find like the male bees sleeping on flowers, especially in the early morning. Carpenter bees, their Xylocopa is the larger of the Carpenter bees, and they're identifiable by their fuzzy thorax, and they have a mostly smooth abdomen. And they have strong enough mandibles to excavate their own nests, and they do really get a bad rap because people hate when they burrow into their houses. Couple things to keep in mind if you have Carpenter bee problems is a coat of paint will cure your problem with Carpenter bees. You don't have to trap them. You don't have to spray them. You don't have to kill them. Or, you know, a certain time of year, plug up the holes, put some paint on, problem solved. Don't try to kill them. They're valuable pollinators. And to be honest, they're not the type of insect that's going to cause your house to collapse in on itself. They're not going to destroy your porch. They want to keep their nests. So they're actually better builders than we would give them credit for. But prevention is key. So if you have old wood, do something about it. Otherwise, you end up with Carpenter bees. And I hate even thinking about killing them. They're probably in my roof and they're welcome. Ceratina are small Carpenter bees, and they are solitary bees, and they excavate their nests in the pithy centers of broken twigs and dead stems. Their jaws are not as strong as the Xylocopa Carpenter bees, so they need to have broken stems in order to be able to excavate. And they forage on a wide variety of plants. They're really, really common. If you see a small black bee on your plant, on your flower, odds are it's probably a small Carpenter bee. These guys are really cool. I love them. Like, I have pictures of them pinned, and they're just the coolest looking bees. This is a male because he has yellow markings on his face. That's usually even with the bigger Carpenter bees, the males have yellow faces. That's why you can tell the difference between the two. Squash bees. These are also ground nesting in large aggregations, and they specialize in foraging on squash plants, cucurbits, pumpkins, cucumbers, that sort of thing. And males can often be found taking shelter in squash flowers. And as you can see, the cucumber beetles have absolutely no shame and just don't even care that they're sharing a flower with a bee. But these guys are great. They're at my community garden. So find them in the squash plants. Megakylidae are some of my favorite bees, and I don't understand why there isn't a line of plush toys that are just native bees, because, I mean, look at these. They're adorable. I would collect them all. I just don't have the time to develop my own line of plush toys. So this is another one, Megakylidae on Echinacea. They're pretty common, summertime emerging. They like to, you can tell it's a Megakylidae by the hairs, the scopa on their abdomens. They're the only family with the scopa on their abdomen. So if you see a furry belly, that's a Megakylidae. Carter bees, wool carter bees are in the Megakylidae family. I call them the punks of the flower bed. Some of these guys are imports, and there's been concern that they may be harmful to other bee species because they're extremely territorial, and they will knock other bees off of flowers in the garden, in the flower bed. I like to watch them. I get a kick out of them. I think this might be a male and a female, and unlike a lot of other bee species, the males are bigger than the females. I think that he's harassing a female at the flower there. But they're also very difficult to photograph. I spend like lots and lots of times trying to photograph these bees, and they're on the flower and then they're out, in and out, all over the place. So it's challenging. This is a resin bee. This is also in the Megakylidae family. These guys are huge. This one just ended up on my patio table one day last year. She just died. She just landed on my patio table. I was sitting there and she died. So she's now part of my collection. These are more of a southerly bee, and they have started to be coming up north a little more. Okay, and Megachilidae, they're identified, as I said, by the pollen collecting hair on their abdomen called scopa. They're solitary nesting, and they make nests in natural or artificial pre-existing cavities. So a lot of people who have like bees nesting in their outdoor windowsill, if there's a space in there, it's probably a Megachilidae. They just look for anything that's already available for them. Leafcutter and mason bees are part of this family. Okay, and then there's the sweat bees, Halictidae, and they're widespread. They're an abundant family with a wide variety of nesting behaviors, even among the same species. And they also have a variety of foraging behaviors. They actually practice a little bit of primitive eusociality, where they have like the queen and like the daughters doing the care. The interesting thing is, in some species, you'll have in one environment, they're solitary. In another environment, the same species is eusocial, which is kind of wild. I get a kick out of it. Agapostamon is part of the sweat bee family, and these are really cool bees. They're on your flowers all summer, and they're really easy to recognize by the green thorax and head, and then the striped abdomen. Females and males have different colorations. This is probably a lasioglossum. It's a sweat bee. Doing bee identification all last summer, everything ended up being a lasioglossum. So most of the time, we just err to that. This is an Agapostamon bee, probably an Oglochlora, but you can really have to identify it by their what is it, the propodium, the wasp waist they have. There's some distinct colorations between a couple different species, but she is living up to the name, or he, to the name Sweat Bee, because it landed on my sweaty bee suit over the summer. Okay, and these bees, I don't know what they are. Eucerini, maybe a kind of Xylocopa, or maybe a Melisodes. These were like my summer project. One of these bees buzzed by my head up in Providence, and I was trying to photograph them all year. They're very quick, on and off flowers like crazy, kind of like the Carpenter Bees in that respect. And I was in Middletown at one of my bee yards, and I found a couple of these buzzing around on some bull thistle. And so that was the excitement of my summer, was being able to photograph these bees on the flower. Yes, that's how I get my kicks. And there's a little video of them. My reluctance to net bees prevents me from proper identification. I always feel bad. Yeah, they're very big, burly bees. I love them. Absolutely love them. So anyway, here are some of my favorite bee books for identification, and actually I use these a lot. The Solitary Bees book I'm trying to get through. It's a very heavy book, lots of information, but it's really good. I love using attracting native pollinators, bees in your backyard, and that's actually a BID handout that I received when I took a bee class at URI pre-COVID. And so those are some good books if you want to learn more about the other bees in your garden. All right, and that's it. Stopping screen sharing. Anybody got any questions for me?
Cindy, I have a question.
Sure. Shoot.
I'm a beekeeper.
Yes.
Why do I care about native bees?
Because they share the same habitat as your honeybees. When people plant for native bees or other bees, it helps honeybees as well, and vice versa. And also, there is a concern about viral and disease spillover from honeybees onto native bees and back and forth. And that also includes, I think that Eczema is harmful to bumblebees. And there's also been some spillover with yellow jackets, viral spillover that they've talked about. I'm sure that if you went online, you can find all the studies. So, but what's healthy for one is healthy for the other. Pesticides is going to affect one, it's going to affect the other. I think that it's really important, if you're a steward of honeybees, that you should also be a steward to all the bees, and have some knowledge of them as well. And also because you're probably going to get a phone call from a friend or somebody, especially if you're on like the mentor list or the swarm list for RIBA, and they'll say, oh my God, there's all these bees swarming in my garden. What do? I want to spray them. And you go, you look, and it's a bunch of sweat bees. And you can educate these people and say, hey, listen, these bees, you can let your little kids go and look at them and practically play with them, and they're not going to cause any harm. So, I think it's important to have that information, because people see a flying thing that looks like a bee, they automatically assume it's a honeybee. So it's good to know about all the bees so that you can give people the proper information.
Question from Steve. Do all native males not sting like Apis mellifera drones?
Yes, all of the all bees and wasps, males don't sting across the board.
Okay. And then Kristen wants to know, are there particular plants I can plant for native bees?
Anything like I think that planting for native bees is easier than planting for honeybees, because especially the polylectic bees are less picky, and you can have, like, I let my basil go to flower every year because the sweat bees love it, the bumblebees love it. So a lot of herbs they love. I mean, you'd have to go. There are some really good books that you can get that tell you the specific plants that specialist bees are attracted to. But if you even have like a little herb garden, you let your basil go to flower, that's going to keep a bunch of bees happy.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at almost any kind of native, not native, but any kind of pollinator planting recommendation, if it's good for honeybees, it's probably also going to be good for native bees, and vice versa. Like Cindy mentioned, the specialist bees, obviously those are going to need that very specific, host or food plant that they need. But in the case of like honeybees, they're generalists. So if you plant something that's good for native bees, the honeybees will also benefit. So it's like, there's this kind of what's the word for it? A little tension right now between native bee conservationists and honeybee conservationists. But really, we can both coexist, and doing what's good for one can also be good for the other. Yeah. What are those big black bees, black and shiny, about an inch in size?
Probably Carpenter Bees.
Yeah.
They get a bad rap. And also, if you're right, especially right now, you find there is a huge Carpenter Bee dive bombing you as you're walking around your yard or something. It's a male Carpenter Bee. Male bees are very territorial, and it's a bluff. He can't sting you. So let him go crazy. It's actually kind of funny and cute. I get a kick out of the male Carpenter Bees.
Do Varroa mites attack native bees?
Sorry?
Do Varroa mites attack native bees?
I don't think that there's any sort of data that shows that they do. But I can't answer that for certain. But I think that it's really important to keep your honeybees healthy, because they're in the same environment as the bumblebees, the carpenter bees, and things like that. I can't really answer that because I don't really know.
Okay. And then this question is, do you think it is a competition between honeybees and native pollinators?
I don't, well, it's, so that's kind of a tough question because I think that like I think is probably, and this is just off the top of my head. I don't have like a research paper to go stick out there, but I imagine the bigger apiary in an area, the bigger the competition. But a lot of the times, if there's plenty of forage for everybody, I think everybody's going to be okay. And I also think that honeybees do the flower fidelity where they lock on to one type of flower. They like a lot of the tree pollen and nectar, things like that. So I don't know. I think that if we have enough forage for everybody, then we're all going to be fine. So I think it's really, really important to preserve habitat and supplement habitat and keep planting for all the pollinators. But I do think it's really important, regardless of whether you're a native bee fan or a honeybee fan, just to keep in mind that there's more than just one type of bee. There's a whole variety of them out there. They're really, really cool to learn about. I think that we all put on blinders to focus on the one thing that we care about. So it's really important to just see the other side of it.
Absolutely. Okay, I don't see any more questions here. So Cindy, I want to thank you for that. That was great. Great overview of native bees and a little philosophy about why that matters to us as beekeepers who aren't actively managing those bees. Sarah, I believe you are up next. Are you around, Sarah?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, Sara Michaud is our vice president. She's a Cornell master beekeeper, and she's going to be talking to us about brood management, brood evaluation.
Assessment. Yep.
Great, if you're ready, go for it.
All right, so let me share my screen. All right, so that should be showing, hopefully. All right, so agenda for tonight to get done in 20 minutes. We're going to talk about assessing the brood pattern, assessing the quality and the health of the brood, and assessing colony size. All right, so assessing brood pattern. The first things you want to do is you want to look at both your capped and uncapped brood. Is it solid, which is more like this picture on your upper right, or is it spotty versus the picture on the lower left? All right, so here's a frame. You're looking at capped brood. There are open cells. From this angle, we don't know if there is an egg in those cells or a larva or honey or anything like that. So we're just looking at what the capped brood pattern is. And depending on the time of the year, like this time of the year, I would say, a full frame like that is pretty good. Peak season, I would say that looks actually spotty. So it all depends. And if you're seeing some of the cells getting backfilled with nectar, then of course the queen can't lay in those while she's making her way across the frames. Here's another frame. There are a lot of bees on this frame, but you can see it's solid capped brood. There's a couple holes here and there on the left. There's drone brood across the bottom. Otherwise, it is a solid frame of brood. This is another frame. This is from Scott, and I did this for another presentation, and he sent me this picture. And the first thing I asked him was if he used wax foundation with wires. So I don't know if you can see my cursor. It almost looks like there are lines where these holes are up and down in this brood pattern. So you might pull this out and you might say, oh, I have, somewhat of a spotty brood pattern. That's where the wire is in the foundation. So clearly the bees did not like those cells. Your queen didn't like those cells, so she skipped those areas. You can see where the where the wire is. So now when you look at your brood patterns, of course, you're looking to see, is it spotty, is it solid? But you're also looking at the cappings. So this is a perforated capping, and I'm not going to get into brood diseases because that could be a 4-hour presentation on its own. But you look at the cap. So a perforated capping is going to tell you there's something going on. There's something wrong, and that could be several different reasons. So another part of assessing your brood. You're also looking at some of these, which we're going to be seeing in the next couple weeks. So empty cells here would be queen cells. These have larvae in them. Those would be queen cups. Also, you can see in these, queen cells, queen cups are on the left if they're empty. You can see clearly, you can see the larva and you can see the royal jelly. So that would be the milky white substance that this larva is in. And both of these cells are pretty full as far as being full of royal jelly. That is a great indication that the bees are receiving the nutrition that they need to enable to feed the brood. And we'll get a little bit more into that with some other slides. Soon enough, we're gonna start to see these. So, both those queen cells and both these large queen cells that are, these two are uncapped, but looks like these might be capped. They're gonna be telling you a lot of what's going on in your hive. Cells of these size, your bees have either swarmed already or they're about to, and your interventions may or may not help at this point. So brood will tell you things about what's going on in your hive and what the bees are doing and planning as far as swarming. So looking at brood quality, so the photo on the left has eggs. And when you're looking at eggs versus larvae, the queen likes to lay in a circular pattern. So you can see in the center here are the eggs. And as you start to go out, you start to see the young larva. And if you went out further and further and further, you would start to see older and older larvae. We've got some eggs up there. And it doesn't really look like, of the cells that we can see into, that none were skipped. And that's what you want to see. On this side here, you can see some larger larvae again, and then you can see some smaller larvae. It's a little hard with some of the angles of the cells and the bees on it, but that's what you would be looking for. And anytime you're looking into a cell at larva, if we go back here on the left, what you want to see is these cells filled with royal jelly. That would indicate that your bees are receiving enough nutrition. If you see the cells are pretty dry, that would indicate they're probably lacking pollen. Sometimes you might even find spotty patterns as far as no eggs, but you're seeing some of the young larvae or very few eggs. And if they're low on pollen, they will actually cannibalize the eggs for the pollen. Or if they just don't have enough pollen to feed the eggs, they're not going to continue to raise bees that they can't feed. They're going to try to concentrate their resources on the larva, the amount of larvae that they can feed. So looking at the patterns, looking at what that looks like as far as quality, again, it's going to be telling you information about your hive. So here's more pictures. You could see a larva here in royal jelly, the white that's around it. You can start to see the smaller larva, eggs in here. That's what you want to look at. So when you're looking at a frame, you're not just glancing, are there eggs? Take a look at some of the younger larval cells and look for that royal jelly. Again, brood quality. So you might be glancing across the top of a frame. Oh, great, capped brood. Oh, wait, why am I seeing some faces? This is called bald brood. Again, indication of a problem. We're not going to get all into that because there's a couple of reasons you can have that. Another disease, you'll see it, the cell will be chewed off. The larva is going to look funny, shrunken head. Another disease, sac brood. American foul brood, you'll see some of those perforated cappings. The cappings will look sunken. You'll see that it looks kind of like the brood has melted. A couple of disorders do cause that. And this one in particular is American foul brood. So again, brood diseases, you can get into conversations for hours about what causes all that. But these would be, as you're scanning your frame, abnormalities. And then you'd want to take a second step back, try to figure out what those abnormalities are. Then how do you remedy those issues? If you want more information about honeybee diseases, the beeinformed.org has the Bee Informed Partnership. If you go on their website under the tab Education and Outreach, on that section, that page, if you go to webinars, they have specifically 2 webinars. One is on adult honeybee diseases, and the other one is on brood diseases. So you can watch, I think they're both about an hour, hour and a half long. Those are both great resources. Then you're looking at population size, and population size changes throughout the year. And it can also be an indicator of something going right or something going wrong in your colony. So there's a couple different ways of doing it. One would be to pull out frames, as this one here. This frame is covered with bees, assuming that the other side looks the same. That would be 1 frame of bees. If you were to bang the bees off of that frame, then you could see how much brood is on it. And if both sides were filled, you would call it 1 frame of brood. So if you were tracking, how many frames of bees are in your colony, how many frames of brood. If it was, half filled with bees or brood on either side, you could mark that down as half a frame, bees or brood. So in different times of the years, it would be appropriate to have a smaller population size or to have frames that did not have a significant amount of brood on it. Coming in our area, end of October, November, there's very little brood in the hive, and then different times starting sometime after the solstice, January, February, it is perfectly normal to have very small amounts of brood. If that happens in May or June, then there may be an issue, and that's something to look into. Another way to assess the population size is when you first lift the lid, quickly just look between the frames, count the number of spaces that occupy the bees. You shouldn't use smoke when you do that, because that of course is going to drive the bees down, so you may not be able to see them between the frames. And it can be a little deceiving different times of the year, like early spring now, you might look quickly and see, oh, there's bees in 5 of those spaces. But if you pull out the frame, they're really only occupying like the top inch or 1.5 inches, 2 inches of that frame. And I have one hive that's like that right now. So on this picture on the left, you can see here, there's 1 frame of bees. They're literally only in 1 space there, and they are. And then here's another photo. You can see in between, they're crawling all over the top, of course, but you can see between each of these frames, there are bees. So that would be 10 frames of bees. And this actually, if you pull the frames out, is barely 1 frame of bees, and barely any brood. And so I do have to thank my bee friends who have those great photos. And the other thing that I would add is when you are looking at brood patterns, abnormal things that are going on in the hive, the queen is not always to blame. If you see a spotty brood pattern or minimal eggs but a ton of larvae, a lot of people, I have a bad queen, I have a bad queen. You may not. There may be something going wrong in the colony that is causing either the eggs to be cannibalized, which is why you're not seeing them, which is a disease, which is causing those perforated cappings. That's not a queen problem. That is an overall colony problem. Dr. Dave Tarpey, I think is with North Carolina State. He has a whole presentation on research that he's done on basically saying like not all hive problems are, what we normally would call a queen problem are queen problems. I do recommend, it's available on YouTube. He gives that presentation all the time. There's several different YouTube channels that have it. Dr. Dave Tarpey, T-A-R-P-Y. It's something that everybody should look into. They've even taken queens that have great brood patterns, queens in a colony that have a bad brood pattern, and swapped them. And the good queen turned bad, so to speak, and the bad queen turned good, so to speak. So there's a lot more to the brood pattern than just the performance of your queen. So do keep that in mind. And I'll take any questions. I did go fast.
Sarah.
Yes.
So there's a question from Steve. Do queens always lay in a circular pattern starting from the outside, or do they start at the center and work outwards, or both?
Typically, they will start at the center and work outward. However, there can be other circumstances. Pollen on a frame, honey on a frame. There's other reasons why they may start. If there's not a lot of frame space left, as some brood emerges, the queen may rush over and fill the egg. So you might have capped brood with an egg directly next to it. But the typical pattern would be they start in the center and work their way out, but it can be different. And it would be then you looking across the frame, looking through the whole colony to determine, is it normal for the situation you're in?
So you had some good good recommendations regarding resources for those disease presentations the BIP have posted. For a backyard beekeeper, I mean, obviously you had to kind of go through the diseases and viruses on a, in a pretty brief window of time here. If someone encounters something that looks like either those specific symptoms that you showed in your photos or just something that doesn't look right, where would you refer them to get more information?
I like the Bee Informed partnership. I like their website a lot. Take photos from a lot of different angles. And then you can blow them up on your computer screen to look at things a lot closer, especially if you're not sure, like, was that a perforated capping or really are they sealing the brood, things like that. You can use your mentors, you can use your resources. There is a lot of information out there. I would avoid going to Google unless you Google it and find like an academic based resource or something like the Bee Informed partnership. But there's information out there, like the Dice Lab has YouTube videos on diseases. The Bee Informed partnership, as I said, does. University of Florida has resources. There's a ton of different resources out there. I'm forgetting the one that has the big Varroa management tool. Honeybee Health Coalition.
Honeybee Health Coalition.
Yeah, Honeybee Health Coalition is another great resource. So there are a lot out there. Of course, you could post it to the RIBA Facebook page. You're probably going to get 1,000 different answers, but it could be a start to say, hey, I think that might be, and then you could go to a more in-depth research on something like that. Facebook would probably be last unless you're just looking for some direction. I would, use a mentor first or an academic-based resource.
Mm-hmm. And of course, if you have a strong reason to suspect something, the state bee inspector is always a great resource.
If you have any question that it might be like an American foul brood or something like that, absolutely call the state bee inspector right away.
Yeah, I mean, we always kind of use, we kind of tiptoe around it when we say it. Like if you see a disease, really what we're talking about is American foul brood 99% of the time. If you see a European foul brood, if you see sac brood, it may be a minor concern to you or your hive. But really when we say contact the bee inspector, we're talking about American foul brood. And that's something to not fool around with. And something also to keep in mind is there's no shame attached to that. Great beekeepers have hives that suffer from diseases. Great beekeepers lose hives. And sometimes it's those, especially with Varroa, those big populous hives are the ones that really suffer because they've got the most brood to support the most Varroa. So if you think you are seeing something, don't have any kind of pangs of like embarrassment. I don't want to like report this to my mentor or to the bee inspector. It's going to be in your best interest and your bee's best interest, and probably in the best interest of, the beekeepers in your surrounding community. The thing to be embarrassed by would be if you saw a problem and ignored it. Don't do that. But if you see a problem, get the help you need and, get it sussed out. And
it can also be a learning opportunity for other people. Like if you see, sac brood, chalk brood, or something like that, take pictures from all angles, share that. There's always Google Images, but to actually see it, from somebody's own camera from different angles, and you can ask questions about, well, what else did you see, in the time of the year, it's a learning opportunity.
Absolutely.
I wasn't embarrassed to show that I have a hive that has, a handful of bees. It's a learning opportunity.
Yeah. No, I mean, there was a quote I read years ago. I was trying to do online chess lessons, and it says you don't learn anything by winning a chess game. And that's how I view beekeeping too. If all you've ever seen in your life are great healthy hives, you're never going to be able to identify these problems. You're probably never going to be able to deal with them because you've never been presented with them. Okay, so there are a number of questions now coming in regarding AFB specifically. I don't know that we want to get into the weeds on actually recognizing and treating AFB. That's probably going to be a little beyond the scope of this talk. How prevalent is AFB? Do you want to address that at least in terms of Rhode Island?
As far as I know, I mean, and I haven't talked to the state bee inspector in a long time. Well, prior to we had meetings in person, but it's not very prevalent, luckily. Which is a good thing. So I mean, I don't. There might have been something maybe a couple of years ago. I don't know, Scott. You might know better incidence-wise, or maybe it was in Massachusetts or New York. Every once in a while, you hear of it. It's not common,
right?
That's for sure.
And really, the reason for that is because we have the apiary inspector program. Throughout the country, people have been trained. If you see a problem, call your apiary inspector. Then they can put the word out to local beekeepers. And again, this is one of the reasons we always preach. Register your hives with DEM. This is the law. And one of the reasons for that is if, Jim Lawson, who is the state bee inspector for the new beekeepers here, if he hears about an outbreak of AFB in your neighborhood, he can then go through the registrations, find other local beekeepers who may be being affected by that, and give them the kind of early warning system, to make those checks. And really, that's been one of the success stories, in American beekeeping for fighting disease or fighting, a pest, is through this kind of surveillance and follow-up through the apiary inspectors. We are able to keep it to what is relatively a rare thing now. I personally have only ever seen it at EAS. And that's always kind of one of the highlights to me is EAS has their bee yard. There'll always be at least one hive that they have a frame that they know has AFB. So everyone kind of gets a chance to go, and you can smell it. You can see what the scale looks like, how it, and that's always a highlight to me, is to go and see that and get, because we don't see it on our day-to-day beekeeping, hopefully. So yeah, personally, I've never seen it. The last time I talked to Jim Lawson was a few weeks ago. I asked him if he had seen any new outbreaks, and he hadn't. It's something that doesn't get publicized a lot, for obvious reasons. But yeah, again, a good reason to register your hives, and that's something I probably should have brought up again at the start of the meeting. We do have that form on the website, ribeekeeper.com, and you are required by law to register your hives at the beginning of every year. So if you're a new beekeeper, you can do that. Unfortunately, you can't do it online. You have to print that form out and mail it in, but there's no cost, there's no taxes assessed or anything like that. So it's a quick and easy thing to do. All right, I'm just going through the chat here. Have you ever seen AFB, Sarah, personally?
No, and actually I haven't even seen European foul brood in person. There was a question last year potentially of it, and I went and it was not. So yeah, I know people have had European foul brood, but I haven't seen it, and I haven't seen American either. Nope.
You're lucky.
So far.
This last question here. Yeah. Okay. So how does hive registration work in Mass? And Ed has answered that kindly. He says it's voluntary. I'm not sure Rhode Island is equipped to answer that question, but Ed would obviously have a good a good grasp on that. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions come in. Sarah, that was great. Would you say, and this is just me thinking out loud, I mean, to me, assessing the brood and evaluating the brood the way you talked about, to me, that's one of the real arts of beekeeping. Like, I think we all kind of get a sense where, yeah, you can go and pull out a textbook and it has like a list of like 10 bullet points of, if you see this, 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 and this, it means this. But part of the art of it is you can kind of pull a frame and instantly just kind of get like that kind of gut feeling of what you're looking at. And to me, that's like a difficult thing to try to, transmit to someone that you're trying to teach. So yeah, I don't know, like, do you have like a tip on how to get, maybe like a deeper appreciation for what you're seeing on the frames,
Well,
beyond just like a textbook kind of listing?
Well, I think experience is a lot, and not you're not just experience looking in your own hives of looking in other people's hives. And there is a skill that comes from that, is to be able, and same with finding your queen, to be able to pull out a frame and it's a scan. You're kind of looking for something that's different or something that's wrong. Like when you're looking for the queen, you don't look at every single bee to find her. You look for what's different because she's different. So when I look at brood patterns, I'm looking for something that's abnormal. I'm not looking to see, is there an egg in every single cell? Is the younger, brood in the center? Is, I'm looking like, why do I have, a clump of old brood here and a pile of holes over here, something like that. So, but that's an experience thing. And if we can get back to in-person things or in little, we're going to be working on a project for Bee Buddies, so if you can find somebody else that's in your neighborhood and you look at their hives, the more that you look at, you kind of develop that ability to recognize things. Field day presentations, demonstrations, we used to do a lot of that at a lot of the summer meetings. So, we haven't been able to do that for the last year. So, people who started last year, kind of missed out on that and partially will this year. But it's an experience thing. My best tip would be just look for what's different. Look for what's abnormal. Don't try to stare at every cell checking. It's a scan.
Yeah, I think that's a great tip. We could list every disease and every virus known to man here. But it's easier to just say, look for what's right. And when you see something that doesn't look right, then you look further. So that was great. Thanks a lot, Sarah. All right, Ed, if you are you good?
Yeah, I was just answering a question about my cat.
Okay. So Ed Szymanski is our program chairman. He's the person who's been bringing us all the great guests. He's also responsible for, collecting the RIBA members we had for this talk tonight. He's a former president of Norfolk County Beekeepers Association, and he is a current Cornell University Master Beekeeper candidate. He's going to be talking about public enemy number one, Varroa. So without further ado, Ed.
All right, thanks, Scott. I had my assistant Izzy over here, but he's left me now. So actually, this was the like the hardest talk I ever had to come up with, which was to talk about mites in 20 minutes. Anybody who participating in the intermediate bee school knows that just
bad luck. Well, their daughter's missing.
Can somebody mute there? The intermediate class I did, I have my mite talk on mites now, is divided up into 2 1 hour. I can't. So it's divided up into two 1 hour. All right, I'm gonna wait. Sorry, just can't do that at the same time as other conversation going on there. So there's just too much when I look through a program and say, let's see what I can cut down. And I just think it's too important. We can talk about biology. We can talk about treatment. We can talk about testing, so many different things. But so what I had to do was sort of distill it down to say, what's the most important thing that I see from people asking questions, from comments, people commenting and questions on Facebook and all. And I think people need to, one of the things that I really think I need to have people understand is, why is it so important? Why is it so important to monitor your mite counts? Why is it so important to treat it at the right time? I won't say exactly the right time, but to treat at the right time, not just to treat randomly. Is so that to understand what the issues are, so that I won't say take it more seriously, but so that you'll concentrate your efforts to where you really need. Because so many comments are made by people who say, well, geez, my bees died over the winter. And then they show you pictures and you look at it and you say, well, that looks like mites. And the answer would be, well, I treated. And then, and then you have to ask questions about, well, when did you treat and what were your counts at the time? And you find out that people weren't really doing it in the best possible way, I'll say. So a few things that I want to say just to start out with here are that, for one thing is your bees do have mites. You may not see them. I hope you don't see them. If you see mites on your bees, you really have a problem. But there are mites. I go back 12 years to when we had our first bees, and we were at a meeting, and I actually said it. Somebody at the meeting was talking about mites, and I said, "Oh, well, we don't have any mites in our hives," and there was a big laugh. That he says he doesn't have any mites, and it's true. Your bees have mites, and you're not going to get rid of them. Mites, mites are here to stay. The best thing we can do is to try to manage them and limit the damage that they do. Varroa mites actually coexist with the European honeybee, Apis cerana, and maybe eventually we'll get to that point too, where the mites will be in our hives and the bees will be able to tolerate them. For the moment, they can't, but if we can keep them under control, we can at least minimize that. There are no mite-proof bees or mite-free bees. There's a lot of talk about mite-resistant bees, mite-tolerant bees, and they're good and they're worth having, they're worth pursuing. And there's work being done to breed mite-tolerant bees, but they are not totally mite-proof. So even if you're using, VSH, Russian Carniolan bees that tend to be mite resistant, you still need to monitor your mite levels, and you may still need to treat. So just so you don't have that mistaken impression. And then, because then when you lose those bees, you're losing very expensive bees. So I find that the survival statistics in the Northeast are very discouraging. And that's why I try to spend a lot of my time on education and trying to help people work on this to beat the odds. Because to me, 45% loss rate is totally unacceptable and it's not sustainable. The idea of losing your bees and buying new bees every year is not pleasant to me. And so we want to try to help to fix that. So a couple of things that actually I want to say in the beginning was that a lot of talk you hear, especially this time of year when people start to talk about their overwinter losses, people say, oh, well, it was that cold snap in March that killed them. It was, they had a lot of snow that year. There's a lot of snowstorms, or the colony wasn't big and it was small, and different reasons, which may have been the ultimate cause of death, but it was probably caused by mites in the first place. And that's another thing that people need to understand. I know Jamie Ellis spoke to RIBA recently, and I go back to a meeting that Jamie Ellis spoke at that Bristol County put on, where Sam Ramsey released his studies about the fat bodies and all, that Jamie Ellis was on first. And he asked people, he was just asking the audience, why are your bees dying? And people had all these different reasons. And he just kept asking over and over again until people started to sort of come around and acknowledge that mites. And then he switched into this Southern preacher mode and paced back and forth across the front of the hall, chanting, Varroa mites are killing your bees. Varroa mites are killing your bees, over and over again. And I think that's true. And I think that a lot of the different reasons we see our bees dying ultimately can be led back to mites. So in Norfolk County a few years ago, we had a program where we did some mapping to locate where all the apiaries were in Norfolk County and identify the owners and get some information from them about their survival and what they were doing for mites and all. And some of the things we learned was that at the time, and I think still, Kim Skirm usually reports every year that the loss rate in Massachusetts is about 45%. And so I'll be positive and say our survival rate is 55%. But what we did find was that people who monitored their mites, who were really on top of their mite situation, they tested, they kept records, they used integrated pest management practices, and they treated when they needed to, even if it was more than once, had a much better survival rate. That their survival rate was 70%. But we also learned that there were still people in Norfolk County, and I think it's true for everywhere, that don't do any mite control at all. Either they don't believe that it's necessary, or they don't have time, or whatever it is, but they do not monitor for mites. And for those people, their survival rate was 17%. And to me, that's just, that's just not sustainable. So, hang on, I get rid of something at this thing at the top of my screen. So there are a couple of different ways that your bees can die, and this is from that mites can kill your bees. First way is what's called Varroa Collapse. And this is where usually late fall, early winter, you'll find that your hive has died. And if you go in and take a look, you'll find a very small number of dead bees. Sometimes you'll find a cluster of bees on a frame, and sometimes the queen will be there and she can even be alive. But you don't have the huge piles of dead bees on the bottom board like would be natural or by a starvation death. And the bees actually left. And so what happens, at one time it was felt that the bees were just leaving. The sick bees, virus-infested bees, were leaving the colony to try to save the colony. But it turns out what they're actually doing is they know the colony is dying. And if the bees die, then the viruses will die. So the bees are actually leaving to go infiltrate other hives in order to propagate the viruses. It's like swarming for viruses. And so there's that's a whole nother story about, robbing and drift and all that causes that. So you either have, just like I said, no bees or a handful of bees. It can happen very quickly. They were fine yesterday and today they were gone. And that's exactly what happens when there's a mass exodus and it's in the winter and there's only a small number of bees left and they can't they can't stay warm. People say they absconded, but they didn't. Absconding is a process by which bees leave the hive that they're in and to go live somewhere else. It often happens with a new package just because they're not happy with their accommodations. And this is an otherwise healthy hive that leaves to go find a new home. And they didn't swarm. Swarm is a natural process by which a hive divides itself. And when the bees swarm, there are live bees remaining in the hive. And it's not colony collapse disorder either. colony collapse disorder turned out to be a symptom rather than an actual disorder, if you will. And it's not that either. But the correct term to use for this is Varroa Collapse. And it's a virus induced collapse of a colony. Now, some of the things that we've learned since about lately, since Sam Ramsey did his work, is that the varroa mites do not feed on the hemolymph, the blood of the bees, like we once thought, but they feed on fat bodies, which are fatty substances in the bee's abdomen that act as an immune system, sort of take the place of a lot of our internal organs like the liver and the kidneys and all. They have cleansing functions, and fat bodies are very important to the bees. And they're tissues that contain various fatty products and some proteins too. The mites access the fat bodies in the bees by burrowing in between the abdomen segments, because the exoskeleton of the bee there is thinner in between the abdomen segments, because it has to be flexible for the bee to be able to basically to bend her body when she's moving around. And the mites found out that they can get in there and they can easily bite through to access the fat bodies of the bee directly. Now, the fat bodies store a compound called vitellogenin, which is a protein, and it's sort of like a fountain of youth type of a material. And it's what vitellogenin does for bees is it straightens their immune system and helps to fight the viruses, the very viruses that the mites are spreading around the hive. But some of the most important points about vitellogenin is that it prolongs the lifespan of the workers. So the bees that are with the eggs the queen lays starting late August are bees that are going to be winter bees. It's triggered by the shortage of pollen, the shortage of natural pollen coming in, tells the bees that it's getting time to get ready for winter. And these bees will have built up fat bodies. Randy Oliver wrote an article called Fat Bees about that. He calls the winter bees fat bees because their fat bodies are built up in order to give the bees what they need to live, basically 6 months rather than 6 weeks. In addition to they're not foraging, which actually prolongs their life as well. And the other thing it does is it aids in the production of royal jelly. And because, if you ever thought about this, your queen starts laying eggs around, in some cases, late January or at least in February. And the bees need to feed them. And obviously, short of maybe a little witch hazel out there, but it might be too cold to forage anyways. How are the bees going to raise this brood if they have no natural food coming in? So what vitellogenin does is it allows the bees to produce royal jelly and to make brood food for the bees when there is no natural food available. And there you see a varroa mite lodged in between the abdomen segments and actively feeding on the fat bodies of the bee. Now, when you're just doing an inspection, you're not going to see that. Like I said, sometimes you do see mites on the backs of bees, but if you were to not see any mites in your hive at all, if you were to pick up a few bees and hold them up to the light, I bet you would find mites in exactly that position. So all of that stuff about the fat bodies and the vitellogenin is important, because this is the second mode by which the mites kill your bees. And that is that the winter bee's lifespan is shortened because the mites have been feeding on the fat bodies, that the very material that's supposed to keep these bees alive all the way through to March has now been compromised. And so the bees will start to die off too early. And you may have noticed this in some of your colonies, that you may have thought we're going to overwinter, but didn't, because they gradually, if you have an infrared camera, you can see that cluster getting smaller and smaller. Or if it snows, you start to see an inordinate number of dead bees out in the snow. This is the bees are dying off at too high of a rate. And then your colony is going to be so small that you get some cold weather, which we can have a really cold week even in March, and they can't cluster and keep themselves warm, and then the bees died. Hence, the statement made was that March cold snap killed them. Well, yeah, I suppose it did, but ultimately it was the mites that killed them. The other problem here is that the compromised nurse bees can't make food for the brood. So the winter bees are dying off, and they may be dying off at a higher rate. Now the queens should be laying, and you should start to be making some brood. But if the bees can't feed the brood, they're going to start, as Sara had mentioned in hers, they're going to start eating the eggs because they need the protein. And when a queen recognizes that you have no nurse bees, or that the bees aren't able to feed the brood, she'll actually stop laying. So now you've got your winter bees dying off. You don't have new bees to replace them, and your colony shrinks, to a golf ball sized cluster in March, and it goes down to 15 degrees or so some night, and the next morning they're gone. That's exactly what happened. Was that colony was damaged by the mites back in the fall. So that dwindling type death usually occurs, like I said, in the spring, early spring, late winter, early spring, at the time that your queen should be laying, and your population should actually start to increase somewhat. It's decreasing instead. And then they just can't, they no longer can carry on. So it really wasn't the cold that killed them. And that's the point that I want to make about that, is that you have a healthy, strong colony going into winter, and you have healthy healthy winter bees, sorry. When you get into February, and we could have a stretch of below zero weather, and the bees can survive that. Our bees live that way, all the time, without insulation and so forth, aren't the issue. The bees can survive in the cold if they're healthy and they have a big enough cluster to keep themselves warm. So just keep that in mind. Now, some of the other areas that of damage that the mites can do, and symptoms. So once again, now, so we're talking about, doing hive inspections and doing evaluations. You're inspecting your hive and you're seeing mites running around on the thorax of your workers. You've got a problem, because this would indicate a very high mite load. You start to see mites on the bees when you do an inspection. You bet, it's safe to say that you probably just should treat rather than doing a test. You're seeing, every time we get drone brood between frames on top of the top bars of the frames, or up in our feeding shims that got left on a little bit too long, and you're breaking open drone brood and you're finding a large number of mites on those pupa, which is disgusting for one thing, but this is an indication of a problem too. Again, probably just time to do treatment. I mean, there are 6 mites on this pupa. It's probably about as many as can actually breed on a drone. Now, looking at some of the brood evaluation, as Sara was showing you too, when you see, and this is something you would often see doing a evaluation of a dead out, you see punctured cappings like these. There are a number of different reasons for that, that you can have punctured cappings. It means, disease larva. Here's one case here where there's actually an adult bee that was going to emerge and died, on the way out. You can see there's a pupa in there too. What's happening here is that the bees, and some bees are better than others at it. The hygienic bees, what that means is that they sense that the brood is sick, and they will break those cappings open in order to kill that pupa and then kill whatever it is that's infecting it, to try to keep it from, infecting the rest of the hive. And then you'll see this, which are pupa that never developed, and there's a mite on one right there. And this condition is called parasitic mite syndrome. And it's a good indication that your hive died because of mite infestation. The other thing you'll see, and this is often what you see during a dead out evaluation, is mite excrement. Mites feed on that fat bodies of the bees, and they produce a single excrement, which is called guanine, and it's like a crystalline material. So you see this white crystalline material, usually right up at the top, because it seems that pupa hatches out, or the bees die, and they pull it out, whatever, and the mites crawling out of the cells, they poop on the way out. So when somebody will post a picture of, oh, this is a hive, this is a frame from my dead hive, what happened, and you see this kind of a level of mite excrement on the hive there, and then, so that's the answer. It was mites. Mites did it. You see, we've got dead bees head first in the cells. What they were probably doing was trying to keep some brood warm. They were heating up the surrounding cells, but there were so few bees left in the cluster at the time that they just couldn't do it, and they died right in place trying to help keep their brood warm. The other thing that happens is it might spread viruses. Mites are called vectors of viruses. There are a number of different viruses. There might even be more than what I have on this list now, but deformed wing virus, I think, is the most prevalent. And to answer a question that came up earlier in the Cindy's, is that Varroa mites will only live on honeybees, eastern or western, Apis mellifera, Apis cerana. But there is concern that viruses can spread from honeybees to native bees, especially deformed wing virus. And deformed wing virus has been found in bumblebees. Black queen cell virus is fairly uncommon. The paralysis viruses are actually fairly prevalent. And the viruses are present in the hive already. The mites did not bring the viruses into the hive, but what the mites did was spread them around. Because they're feeding on the bees, and because the mites are very mobile through the hive, they can spread viruses around a hive and quickly overrun. So the other things that happen are here, like I said, a worker's lifespan can be reduced by up to 50%. So you've got winter bees that are supposed to live from September to March. And instead, if that lifespan had been reduced by 50%, you're looking at first of the year that the workers are going to start dying off. So that's definitely an issue. Wax glands can be damaged by the mites because, you realize that the mites are feeding on the pupa. So, it's like something feeding on a baby in the womb. The bee is going to be damaged during its development. So there's any number of things that actually can go wrong with it. And so wax glands can be damaged, which is obviously a problem. Bees need to build wax. They need to build comb to give the queen a place to lay, to store food. So the implications of that are just tremendous. Their food-making glands can be damaged. So that's obviously an issue as well. And then another thing that makes you think too is that it can cause reduced sperm count in drones. Now, mites seem to be more prevalent in drone cells. It was once thought because it was a larger cell, and that's actually not the case. The reason you find more mites in the drone cells is because of the drones have a 3-day longer gestation period, if you will. 21 days from egg to emergence for a worker, and 24 days from egg to emergence for a drone. That's 3 extra days that mites can reproduce within the cell. And so you've got 5, 6 mites feeding on a drone pupa. One of the things that happens is that maybe it's the stress and maybe it's a physical damage, I don't know, but they do find reduced sperm count in drones that have been damaged by mites. And so what does reduced sperm count in drones mean? It means early queen failures, because if queens are mating, a queen's going to go out and she's going to mate with 12, 15 drones, but this drone isn't providing the sperm necessary to fill her spermatheca. Now, this queen goes back to the hive, to begin her life of laying eggs, and she runs out. She runs out in a year. She runs out in a year and a half. Jamie Ellis now continually talks about queens not surviving. Jamie says that what he sees is very prevalent is queens only living a year or maybe even less. I've heard him mention 6 months. Now, one of the reasons for that, for queen supersedure, queens starting to lay a lot of drones, and other spotty brood pattern type things, is that the queen actually runs out of sperm, and she's supposed to have enough to give her a good long laying life of at least 3 years, or maybe even 4 sometimes. But if she's being mated with drones with insufficient sperm counts, she's going to have to, she's going to be superseded earlier. So the damage is really far-reaching. So I probably took my 20 minutes already, but I just want to say a few things about, there's plenty of information available about treatments. You follow the directions on the products. It's a good topic for another time anyways, but it makes you go for hours. What you want to do though, is you want to test, you do mite counts monthly, starting in May. That's when I do. Some people maybe even start in April, but you determine a threshold. Most people use 2%, which is 6 mites in a half cup of bees. 300 bees, 2% is 6 mites that it's time to treat. After you do your treatment, do not assume that you've solved the problem. Retest again 2 weeks after the treatment. Last year in particular, I know I know a lot of other people who found they were finding rebounds of mites where they did a count, had a certain mite count, did a treatment, and when they retested 2 weeks later, it was even higher. I'm trying to collect some more data on that just to find out just how prevalent that was up here in Norfolk County, because it's something of great interest. We had one ourselves where we were sampling in our yard, and we had taken what we do is to treat, if we get a high mite count, we treat all of the hives in the apiary at the same time. So this happened to be hive number 1, gave us a count of 7. Our threshold is 6. So we said, okay, we're going to do a treatment. So we did Formic Pro treatment on all 9 hives in the yard. Now, after that Formic Pro treatment was done, 2 weeks later, we did another mite count, started with hive number 1, got a count of 25. I don't know, why and how that happened. But what I do know is that is the only hive in the yard that didn't live through the winter. So you absolutely need to recheck. And I know you're often told not to treat too much, but in the situation where you retest and you get a high count, you have to treat. Even if the treatment is hard, could be, if it's hard on the bees, being infested with mites is even harder. But all of this, why it's so, I think it's so important to know about the fat bodies, about the vitellogenin and all of that, is that the most important thing here for doing this mite treatment is that you have healthy winter bees. So winter bees, as I said, and mid to late August, pollen supplies start to drop off, and the hive's going to start rearing winter bees. And it is at that point the absolutely most important time for mites to be under control is going into the end of August. So when I say under control by mid-August, I don't mean necessarily treating, as long as you're doing your counts and you know that your counts are low. But we've reconsidered this in some ways, that the end of August is the most critical time, because from there going forward is when your winter bees are going to be developing. So if we're getting counts of a couple of mites, even below our threshold, but we know there are some mites in there, they're only going to expand from there. We have learned this, that going into September, unchecked mite populations will explode going into September and even into October, because the mites reproduce themselves exponentially. Every one of those brood cells, say a worker brood cell could have 4 mites in it, every single one. That adult bee emerges and 4 mites come out of that cell, and each one of them goes into its own cell and produces 4 more. So if you had a mite count of 3 at this point, that count of 3 becomes 12, and then that count of 12 becomes 48, you see? So what we've done is to change our regimen a little bit, is to actually do a treatment at the end of August, even if we haven't reached the threshold, as I said, because that is the most important time. But you still need to follow through on this. Never assume that you've reduced your mite load to a good point. You have to know. So the most important things you can do here are to know what's going on in your hive. When you know what your mite situation is at all times, and when you do see a problem, do something about it as soon as you possibly can, because it only spirals out of control and fairly quickly. So like I said, our plan is to because of drift between hives, if we have any colony apiary tests above the treatment threshold, then we treat them all at the same time. And if you're going to do treatments, read the directions. Don't go by that's why, sometimes I hesitate to even tell people what to do. The state inspectors hesitate to tell people what to do. You need to go by the manufacturer's instructions. They made the stuff, they know how to use it. You can do more harm than good by going off the label, because you'll think that you did a treatment when you really didn't. And then, like I said, populations are going to explode. I say that phrase over and over again because that's the problem. So keep testing until it's too cold to actually go in and do the treatments. I like to do a little touch-up treatment in, say, early November with an oxalic acid dribble just to get rid of the phoretic mites that might still be there, because the mites can live through the winter. They're not able to reproduce, but phoretic mites will live 6 months. And basically when they're waiting for spring, just like we are, but what they're waiting for is some brood to be laid so that they can climb in and reproduce. So if you do a touch-up treatment in the fall, late fall, early winter, you knock those phoretic mites out of there, there'll be fewer mites to start reproducing in February and March. So know your mite levels at all time and treat when you need to. This is the thing. We were told many years ago, always treat by August 1st. And then it became always treat by August 15th. And now, no, you treat when they need it. And in my opinion, no other time other than in late fall, early winter, because you need it then, because you just need to get rid of those mites that are hanging around. Never assume that you've taken care of the problem. If you have colonies that seem to always have an issue with mites needing a lot of treatment, consider requeening them with some sort of resistant stock. And think about your neighbors. If your decision to not treat your colony and allow them to collapse may mean that the mites invade your neighboring apiaries and cause them a mite and virus problem. And that's a real issue because we know how far bees can travel. And it can definitely become an issue for your neighbors. Keep records so you know what's going on. Always know what your situation is. Look back from year to year so that you can get a trend and maybe predict the future and plan ahead. Use mite-resistant stock. Like I said, do a final treatment in the late fall. And when your bees do survive the winter, make splits from them, raise queens from them. The bees that traditionally have low mite counts because they have hygienic properties, breed them. You know, that's the thing. Breed, you know, make from you more from your successes, and then always stay on top of what's going on. Attend conferences and meetings, and things are changing all the time, and you need to learn, keep up on what's happening. So that's all I have. We can.
That was a valiant effort, trying to keep that all to 20 minutes.
And I didn't.
Well, you were close.
Oh,
The court will allow it in this case. So there are a few questions here. Some of these Steve has been responding to already, but I think this is good for everyone. Since we know there are mites, why bother testing? Why not just go ahead and treat them?
what I just said. Because like I said, it's a matter of treating them at the right time. Yes, I know we have mites. That's, that's part of the point. But really, you want to treat as little as you need to. You always want to treat when you have to, but you don't want to be treating constantly. I mean, these are foreign materials that you're introducing to your hive, and they're irritants to your bees. I don't care what kind of a treatment it is. The bees don't like the fact that it's in there. And some of these, even the organic acids, they can be harmful to brood. So you don't want to treat any more than you have to. Hence, it's important to treat at exactly the right time. That's why. I know the mites are there too, but I want to do my treatments when my mite situation is at worst, because I don't want to do a treatment in June and then maybe another one in July and then not treat anymore and find out that my mite populations have exploded in September. That's about all I can say about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important. We have to remember these are the mite treatments we use are pesticides. So we're putting pesticides in a hive of live bees. The rationale is it's the lesser of two evils between the mites and the pesticide, but make no mistake about it, as gentle as a mite treatment might be to your bees, as Ed just said, it's still an irritant. It can have effects on the brood, it can have effects on the queen's quality. So you definitely want to try to look, none of us want to use treatments. I mean, that's should be obvious to everyone, is we don't want to use treatments. We do it because we know it's what we need to do right now, to keep our bees alive. But Ed, how do you feel about an Apavar treatment beginning your first week inspection on a new package of bees in order to start the colony off with a low threshold?
Well, for one thing, I don't like to use Apavar because it's a chemical insecticide. But again, now we're treating when we don't know if we need to. Because certainly a material like Apavar, you don't really want to use more than once in a season. And so now you're using it. I mean, you basically, you're shooting all your weapons before you're actually defending anything. So I would say no. I know some people do oxalic acid treatment with a package. I don't buy packages, so I don't know. I don't know if we have mite problems with packages or not. But I still would say I want to test. I want to test, and I want to treat when my tests say that I need to.
Right. I mean, obviously Apavar 2, you're not allowed to have on with honey supers. So depending on when you get your package, you know, Apavar is a pretty long treatment to have in a hive that could start to encroach on the time where you would normally have your honey supers on. So that could also inform your decision. Lori asks, Ed, do you retreat with the same product or change products after treatment when counts remain high? And then she says she recognized you might change because honey supers are on or temperature might affect that, but otherwise, all things being equal, would you change?
I would, because I wouldn't use the same product 2 times in a row anyways. So yeah, I would treat, I think that, you know, like a formic acid type of thing, if you were to do a treatment with that and then 2 weeks later get a count and then do that again, I just think that's awfully harsh on them. So I would definitely treat with something else. And if it means taking the honey supers off, you take the honey supers off, because the important thing here is that our bees are healthy, not that we get honey. I like to treat with the formic acid because I can leave my supers on. I know there's a HopGuard 3 out now. We didn't have very good luck with HopGuard 2, but that would be something else that might be something good to try too, because you keep your supers on for HopGuard. And I know these other products are only recommended to be used when you're broodless, but you have to do something, you know, if you get a high count. So, and I think that 2 formic acid treatments in a row is just too harsh.
I mean, this is kind of a question for anyone. Has anyone tried the oxalic drip, and how is it done? Do you want to try to briefly address that?
Yeah, I do. We do oxalic dribble, and I did it on after we got that high rebound count last year too. But basically what you're doing is you're mixing a measured amount. You can buy it in packets. It's 35 grams of oxalic acid powder into a quart of sugar syrup, 1-to-1 sugar syrup. And there are a syringe that you can buy. It's a 50 cc syringe that's graduated in 10 5 cc increments. And the rule is that you are going to apply 50 cc's max of oxalic acid to your hive. Now, something that Sara talked about in her evaluation thing was the spaces between the frames that have bees in them. And what they call that, the manufacturer calls that a seam of bees. So what you're going to do is you're going to do 5 cc's per seam of bees. So you open up the hive. It's a, say, 50-degree day. The bees are loosely clustered. If you use 2 brood boxes, you split your brood boxes. I just lift it up. You get the technique down, and you're going to drip 5 cc's of this liquid across the seam of bees. And you're going to drip the liquid on the bees, because it's not going to do any good anywhere else. If you drip it on the top bars or between frames that don't have any bees on them, it's wasted. So 5 cc's per seam of bees, and 50 cc's max per hive. There are plenty of instructions out there to be able to do it. It's really not hard. And I highly recommend it, like I said, for a touch-up treatment.
Yeah, we also use that. And especially if you have a partner to like crack the lids for you, you can do a hive in like 25 seconds. I mean, it's so fast. You know, I know a lot of us have already come to the conclusion that we don't want to do oxalic vaporization because of the risk to the applicator. But oxalic, it even dribbled carries risk to the applicator, but it's nowhere near what you're going to experience with the vapor. So Ed, do we know if the mites have become immune to some of the treatments? Yes.
What we're most concerned with is the actual insecticides. I don't think any immunity to the organic acids has been demonstrated. or to the essential oil material like Apavar, not Apavar, but Apavar and Apagard, that there's any resistance shown to any of those. There are some treatments that were formerly used and to my surprise are still available. There's one that's called Checkmate, and the material is Coumaphos, and the other one is fluvalinate, which is Apostan. And I know you can buy Apostan because people have used it. And one of the things that happens with those things is people put those treatments on and they leave them on too long, or they take them off too soon, or whatever. And the bees don't get the mites don't get the right dose. It's like, stopping if you're taking antibiotics, you stop taking them too soon, or you take too small of a dose. We develop resistant bacteria. It's the same thing. So it is highly recommended to not use Apostan or Checkmate, those old products. And likewise, we now have the same concern that the bees are going to develop resistance to Apavar, because again, that's Amitraz, which is a chemical insecticide. And an Apavar treatment is supposed to be 6 weeks. Coincidentally, this is the life of a worker. 45 days, actually, I think is what they say. But what happens is people put these things in October or early November, and 45 days later, it's too cold out to open the hive to take them out. And so they leave them in for the winter. And what happens is the mites get exposed to an increasingly smaller dose of the insecticide, and that's what makes them resistant. So I think we're going to see resistance to Apavar in the not too distant future, and they're going to have to come up with something else. And commercial beekeepers love to use it because they can just stick them in and forget it. But I think that's part of the problem.
Okay. Just a comment here about someone has had excellent success flattening the curve using drone trapping in late spring and midsummer. And you didn't really talk about this, but that's one of the kind of foundations of IPM. Using mechanical means like drone trapping to kind of chip away before you reach that economic threshold for damage. And yes, many of us here have also used that. Have you ever used that personally, Ed?
Once in a while. We get a lot of drone, comb built in various places, like between the frames and so on. And so, we'll cut that out to get rid of them too. The thing that you need to be careful about, which was why I think drone trapping may not be good for the average person, with a 9-to-5 job who has a hard time finding time to get into their hives, is that if you put drone frames in and raise frames full of drones and you don't get them out before the drones emerge, what you're doing is breeding mites in your hives. So if you want to do it, you've got to do it very carefully. You got to watch your dates. You have to know what the life cycle of a drone is. When is it capped and when's it going to emerge, and get those things out of there before it's been 24 days. Or else you're only going to make things worse. So yeah. Yes, it's good. It's good when used properly, like anything else. And I do have that. I got a whole IPM part of my big talk, but that's definitely one of them.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, it has a certain amount of effectiveness. You've really got to be on top of it, though, or like Ed said, you're breeding mites at that point. Okay, so I don't see any further questions. We're reaching 9 o'clock here. Before we wind up, I want to mention our next meetings are going to be May 9th at 7 o'clock. We have Dr. Rachel Benowen. She is currently at Providence College. She's going to be talking about why bees like dirty water. We've all seen this. You're probably seeing it right now. You've got potted plants out in your yard. Your bees are not going to your nice, fresh, Tractor Supply brand chicken feeder that you put out there with fresh, clean water. They're going and sucking out dirty, muddy water. She's got some research on this, and she's going to be talking about that on Sunday, May 9th. And then June 10th, this is really a coup for us. We finally are going to bring in Dr. Sam Ramsey. Ed mentioned him in his talk. Sara mentioned him at one point, I believe, in her talk. This guy really rewrote the book on what we know currently about Varroa. I mean, one of the smartest young researchers around right now, and just such a great, entertaining speaker. I always say, if you know nothing or care nothing about honeybees, you could listen to this guy and just be entertained for the entirety of his talk. So you definitely want to block out some time. That's going to be June 10th, which is a Thursday, by the way. And obviously, we're going to have dates and reminders of this going out to you, but our meetings typically are on Sunday. That's going to be a Thursday, so you want to kind of keep that in mind. But make every effort to be on hand for that, because that's going to be a good one. So without further ado, I want to thank all three of our presenters, Cindy, Sara, and Ed. You know, listening to you guys, I was trying to collect questions as we went, things that I thought people would want to know or should know. And really, by the end of all three of your talks, you basically answered all my questions, you know, the things I had intended to ask you. So great, thorough job on all three of your topics. And I like the format of this meeting. So hopefully this will be something we can do going forward. I know there was some good comments also in the chat saying kind of the same thing. And if you guys have any further questions, I see the chat is kind of still going here. You know, you can always email us, post it on the Facebook group. Again, for those of you guys who were installing packages this week, or, you know, in the upcoming weeks, if you have questions, we're always available. So reach out. And with that, I'm going to wish you all guys all a good Sunday night. Enjoy the rest of your week. Good night. Thank you, guys.
All right.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.